military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. Originally, we had planned Dr. Robert Jeffress to be in studio, and just a while ago, he said he was running behind and might only be able to join us by phone, and then later on actually limited the amount of time we could spend with him, so we decided maybe we'll postpone to another day, because we know that certainly we want to spend some time talking about his new book, but at the same time, I didn't want that to trump, if you'll pardon the pun, some of the conversation we certainly wanted to have with him about his, not endorsement, but certainly appreciation for Donald Trump. So we will try to make that happen in the future. I'm a little disappointed because a lot of us were looking forward to it. We will have Michael Youssef in with us in the second hour, but this does give us a chance to revisit some of the issues in the news, and there are many. Yesterday, of course, we talked about the fight to replace the vacancy on the Supreme Court. And, of course, we talked about the election, and there are some new polls out suggesting that maybe Ted Cruz is number one, but it's an outlier, so we'll talk about that. Would never have predicted that there would be a battle between the Pope and Donald Trump, but that one unfolded just a few hours ago, so we'll talk about that, voter ID. And I also want to come back to this issue of the demand by the FBI to require Apple to essentially write malware for their own phones so that they can crack one phone, they say. But now many people are saying, no, this would just give them the key to any phone and allow them to then begin to break down the encryption that many of us have in all of our phones. And so while there are those who say, well, why can't Apple just take that iPhone 5 that was owned by Syed Farouk and used with his wife Tashfeen Malik in the San Bernardino killing? But the bottom line is there are much bigger issues involved in that, and we'll probably talk about that as well. So all sorts of issues to address, and let me take the one that's just kind of hit the news over the last couple of hours, because I have the statement by the Pope Francis, as well as the response by Donald Trump. I must admit, I did not see this one coming, but Pope Francis said that Donald Trump is not a Christian if he wants to build a wall along the U.S.-Mexican border. Donald Trump didn't waste any time by firing back that it was disgraceful, he felt, for a religious leader to question a person's faith. But the actual quote from Pope Francis was, quote, "A person who thinks only about building walls wherever they may and not building bridges is not Christian. That is not the gospel," unquote. And so a lot of this had to do with the fact that the Pope came to Mexico and even went to the border to pray. And I think what started this is last week Donald Trump even said that the plan by the Pope to go and pray at the border show that he's a political figure. And interestingly enough, at the time, Pope Francis said, well, that's fine, because after all, Aristotle described a human being as a political animal. So he didn't take that necessarily as a criticism and felt in some respects that what he was doing was appropriate. And so that's why Donald Trump wanted to spend some time saying, you know, I think you're being used as a political pawn. This is the actual statement came out just recently from Donald Trump's headquarters. It said, if and when the Vatican is attacked by ISIS, which as everyone knows is ISIS' ultimate trophy, I can promise you that the Pope would have only wished and prayed that Donald Trump would have been president, because this would not have happened. ISIS would have been eradicated, unlike what is happening now with our all-talk, no-action politicians. Donald Trump goes on to say, the Mexican government and its leadership have made many disparaging remarks about me to the Pope because they want to continue to rip off the United States, both in trade and at the border, and they understand that I am totally wise to them. A little bit of hyperbole there, but nevertheless, then Donald Trump says, the Pope only heard one side of the story. He didn't see the crime, the drug trafficking, and the negative economic impact the current policies have on the United States. He doesn't see how Mexican leadership is outsmarting President Obama and our leadership in every aspect of negotiation. For a religious leader, he says, to question a person's faith is disgraceful. I'm proud to be a Christian, and as a president, I will not allow Christianity to be consistently attacked and weakened, unlike what is happening now with our current president. No leader, especially a religious leader, should have the right to question another man's religion or faith. They are using the Pope as a pawn, and they should be ashamed of themselves for doing so, especially when so many lives are involved and when illegal immigration is so rampant. One of the questions on the table for you today is, what about this? Is it appropriate for the Pope to address some of these political issues? He certainly has been and spoke on the issue of capitalism and all sorts of economic issues, and certainly then talked about a man who, instead of building bridges, is building a wall. There have been a few commentators, by the way, I might just point out, and I've not seen this because I've never been to Rome and the Vatican, but apparently there's like a 40-foot high wall around the Vatican. So it is interesting that if you live in a world where you have a wall that protects you, might be a little more careful about what you say about other people that want to build a wall. But nevertheless, if you'd like to join us on that issue, it is one that has kind of transpired over the last couple of hours. Donald Trump and Pope Francis. Didn't see that one coming, wouldn't have expected that, but that's one that we certainly can talk about if you would like to join our conversation. One of the articles I've posted here is Ted Cruz leads in the latest poll, and this is something that caught a lot of people off guard last night. It's something that, by the way, was interesting that Ted Cruz did not waste any time to stand in front of an audience and say, now for the first time, someone else besides Donald Trump is leading among the Republican contenders, and that was, of course, him. Now, we've got to talk about this for a little bit, and we'll do some of that as well after the break, because what it says is that Ted Cruz, if you accept this poll, and it's done by the Wall Street Journal and NBC, but some have made a point about the fact that this is somehow associated with, Fox News and all the rest. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But it has Ted Cruz at 28% nationally, Donald Trump at 26% nationally. And then you go down to Marco Rubio, 17%, John Kasich, 11%, Ben Carson, 10%, and Jeb Bush, 4%. The surprises aren't just in the front end, it's also in the back end as well, because if you look at most other polls that we have been monitoring over time, you usually have Ben Carson at about 4%. Here he's at 10%. Most of the time, they usually have Bush and Kasich at least 6%. This has Bush at 4%. So it isn't just the surprise of Ted Cruz at 28% and Donald Trump at 26%. It's sort of all the way down the line a big surprise. It is, as we would say, an outlier, because when you look at the other polls that have come out, most of them have Donald Trump with about at least 35% of Republican voters. And the best you can find for maybe Ted Cruz is 23%, except for this poll. So even if you took the 35 to 23, that's still a 12% difference. And instead, you have Ted Cruz ahead by 2 percentage points. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about polls and then move on to some other topics that certainly are relevant, because we have a caucus in a very important state of Nevada, a primary in a very important state, South Carolina, and some very important issues that we need to discuss. But I do also want to talk about these polls and why it's important to, whenever you hear about a poll, take it with a grain of salt. But if you'd like to join our conversation, maybe you have some comments about Donald Trump, about the possibility that Ted Cruz is leading, or about this conflict between the Pope and Donald Trump, we'd love to hear you. 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some of those phone calls and continue our discussion right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, when Bernie Sanders won the New Hampshire primary last week, one of the commentators talked about how the senator believes there's a conspiracy underfoot. He argues that the reason we have so much income inequality is due to the fact that the billionaire class has rigged the economy. He makes it sound like this is a uniquely American problem. It is not. You can find similar gains by the 1% in places like Canada, the UK, and other European countries. And we might mention that most of the increase in income inequality over the last quarter century took place when fellow Democrats Bill Clinton and Barack Obama were president. His conspiracy is rather paranoid, don't you think? There are only a few hundred billionaires, yet we are to believe that this small, secretive cabal rigged the system so that they can get ahead, but you cannot. These billionaires made their wealth by designing software you use on your computer, by buying land and developing it, by building stores that sell goods at the lowest possible price, and by developing new and more efficient ways to extract oil and gas from the ground. Bernie Sanders ignores most of these billionaires, but talks about people and banks on Wall Street that speculate. As I mentioned in a previous commentary, that is why the movie The Big Short helps his campaign. It tells the story of some investors who bet against the housing market because they concluded it would fail. So far, the opponents of Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, or some future Republican nominee, have not critiqued his billionaire class conspiracy. The response has generally gone like this. It's fine, Uncle Bernie. Go back to your bed in the basement, and we'll call you when the dinner is ready. It's time for some candidates and some pundits to address his billionaire class conspiracy with some facts and common sense. The voters need to know the flaws in this conspiracy. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Columbia Pictures, LD Entertainment, and Affirm Films present Risen, the resurrection through the eyes of a non-believer. Risen, rated PG-13 in theaters February 19th.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to take the time to join us, we will take some of your phone calls in just a minute. 1-800-351-1212. And just let me mention briefly before we do get some of those phone calls that when we look at these polls, you do have to take them with a grain of salt, maybe even a whole bucket of salt, because the reality is this. We as individuals, especially as citizens, oftentimes don't answer phones anymore. And so it used to be very easy. You would call a home, you would talk to an individual. That phone was something that people tended to answer and not actually send it to their answering machine. And so you had a pretty good idea. The only real question is to determine who was a voter, who was a likely voter. That's a little difficult process. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But now that a lot of people don't have home phones, they have cell phones. I just a minute ago saw on my computer, my phone is ringing. And of course, I keep it off because I do radio. And I look at it, I go, I don't know where it came from. I didn't answer it, and they didn't leave me a voicemail, so I'm not talking to them. And so it could have been somebody actually polling, but they didn't get my opinion on that. So that's the first issue. The second one, though, and this is where I think it is possible that both the CBS poll that has Donald Trump ahead 35-18 and the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, which has him behind 28-26, could both be right. And that has to do with the really difficult determination of who is actually a likely voter. Is it possible that a lot of people that like Donald Trump aren't really going to go out and vote for him. They like him, but, if it is easy for them to get to the polls, they'll vote for him. But if it's not, if it's raining or they forget, they won't. And so this is the difficulty of determining who are the likely voters. And so with certain kinds of specific questions that have been used in the past, sometimes they can determine who is a likely voter and who's simply a supporter but isn't likely to go to the polls and vote for that individual. So that's another reason why you can have a wide variation in some of these polls. And so we'll have to see how this plays itself out in the next couple of days, because we, of course, have the Nevada caucus this Saturday. And that's the Democratic caucus. We have the South Carolina primary, which is a Republican primary. Then they reverse. On February 23rd, you have the Nevada caucus for the Republicans. February 27th, you have the South Carolina primary for the Democrats. And so we'll talk about that. And at any point, we certainly love to hear from those of you that are in Nevada or South Carolina. We'll give you some precedence and preference, if you will. But let's take some phone calls. First of all, before we go to South Carolina, let's go to Nebraska first. KCMI. Colleen, thank you for joining us today.
Am I on?
You are on. We would love to hear from
sorry.
you.
I thought, yeah, okay. Well, the thing about Donald Trump, first of all, I am going to vote for him, not because I really love him, but because we need a CEO. We need to get our government back in line. But the thing is, we've already allocated money for a wall that hasn't been started to be built. I mean, I know there's some.
There's some, yeah. But yeah,
that money's already been allocated.
Yes.
Right. The money's already been allocated. Where is it? So really the Pope has no idea what he's talking about when he's saying, well, he's putting the wall up. Number two, I want the wall. Not because I want to keep people out necessarily, but you know what? Come in legally. Come in legally. And let's, I have no problem with that. Have them come in with visas. And we had Mexico at one time. If they want to come here so badly, just give us back Mexico. We'll make them another state, or have a few more states. I just think that the Pope obviously is not doing his homework because the money's already there for the wall.
Yes. Well, and we had Nick Adams in studio with us just a few days ago, and he was talking about Australia, which is a different situation. You don't have to build a wall because you have an ocean, but by interdicting those ships and turning them around, and by the Prime Minister saying if somehow you even figured out how to get here overnight or sneak in through a cargo ship, you will not be an Australian citizen and we will turn you back. That stemmed the tide. And if indeed there's a wall that is going to be difficult for young children, at least, to get across, then this tragedy that we have right now of so many of these parents in Mexico and Guatemala and Colombia and other places sending their kids across the border with the hope that they will maybe find a better life will end. So there is not just the reality of the wall preventing it, it's the deterrence factor of helping people recognize that if you even spend all the time, energy, money, and danger to get here, it won't be a prize that you will win because you'll be sent back once again. And I think that will change the dynamics almost instantaneously, as much as starting construction on that section of the wall that needs construction.
That's right. And if they would just do it, but I know that there's a certain president that's presiding right now that is not doing his job. So.
Well, I certainly appreciate you calling. I know that it's going to be a while before those of you in Nebraska get to vote. So thank you for expressing your opinion, and call in again, okay?
Thank you.
Let's take another phone call. This time we will go to South Carolina because, after all, that's where the Republican primary will be taking place this weekend. And so, Deanne, on the Good News Network in South Carolina, you have the floor. What would you like to say?
Hello, thank you so much for taking my call. And I'm driving, so I'm being very cautious. I completely echo what that young lady said from Nebraska. I am a Ben Carson fan. I am a believer. And I think that Donald Trump coming to the forefront and just taking on the Pope, it seems like there's nothing that this man is afraid of. And I somehow kind of feel like he's taking a stand for Republicans, even though he's maybe not been a Republican all his life, and he's lived a very, very affluent life. But this man has a heart, and you're seeing that more and more, and he's smart, and he's not fearful. And I just, he's really fearless, and I just really appreciate the fact that it was said, I don't know if you were the one that stated, I think it was, that there's a 40-foot wall around the Vatican.
Yes, there is.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And
amazing how that is so essential right there in Rome. But go ahead.
Imagine that. And yes, and they have Swiss guards all around, But nonetheless, I just think that the Pope needs to just mind his own business and stay in his own little walled-in area and just sit there and vacate for a while. Oh, is that a pun? Vacate at the Vatican. But anyway, vegetate or something. But thank you so much, and pray for South Carolina that we make the right choices and the right decisions.
Now, it does sound like you're going to, even though you like Donald Trump, you are going to, on Saturday, and of course you don't have to tell me, that you're going to vote for Ben Carson. Is that true?
I am. I just believe that this man has such a heart for God and such a heart for his country. And, being a physician, he is to do what he does, the kind of medical work that he does. It takes the most intelligent man to do that, or person to do that. And I just think about that, and I think, God has down through the ages raised up men and women to take a stand, and I just believe that this man is right on.
Yeah. Again, as I said before, I've had probably more time with Ben Carson than any of the other candidates, and what you see is what you get. A man of great integrity, and really, I think his last-ditch effort is in South Carolina. If indeed this poll that I just mentioned a minute ago gives him 10% instead of 4%, maybe he moves on to the Super Tuesday primaries March 1st, hoping that maybe something springs there. But we will see, and that's, of course, why we file these various candidacies, and then why we actually have those elections, because who would have predicted this time last year that Donald Trump would be doing as well as he is doing? And frankly, 2 years ago, even when most of us, although I knew Ben Carson before he spoke at the National Prayer Breakfast, I actually shared a stage with him on a few occasions, but nevertheless, who would have guessed even 2 years ago when he spoke at the National Prayer Breakfast that he would be a presidential candidate and that he would still be on the stage with many of those other individuals? So this is why you actually hold these elections, and those of you in Nevada and South Carolina, we are focusing on you. And I know that a lot of our listeners tend to be Republican, but I know some of you are Democrats. So when I come back, I want to talk about what's going on in Nevada right now. Hillary Clinton just cannot believe what is happening to her. The latest poll maybe has her even or maybe a 1-point lead over Bernie Sanders in the Nevada caucus. Now, she supposedly has a much greater lead in South Carolina, but as one of her staff members said, if you can't win in Nevada, you really can't feel very confident about South Carolina. So this was supposed to be a coronation, and it has been anything but for Hillary Clinton, and then, of course, she will be doing it in reverse. They will then have the Nevada caucus and then the South Carolina primary. Republicans have the South Carolina primary, then the Nevada caucus. We'll come back and explain some of that and take some more phone calls. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Later this year, for the 58th time, America will choose a president. As a Christian, what are you doing to prepare for the election? Helping you cut through the major media spin is part of the mission of Point of View. We want to provide the best election resources, including a new website, Pray, Organize, Vote, encouraging people to intercede for the upcoming election, to help you get registered so you can exercise the stewardship of voting, to share things to help you get people involved and out to the polls. But to do all of that, we need you to vote right now with your support for Point of View. Show us that you're in this for the long haul as a citizen of heaven as well as the United States. Click Donate Now at the top of the page and give the most generous one-time gift you can at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5133. 51. There is a lot of work to be done. Let's get to it together. pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Might just again mention that we have our Pray, Organize, and Vote resources. And just a few minutes ago, we had somebody who was talking about, I'm not sure I could vote for Ted Cruz because, he's pro-abortion. And we said, no, he's not. And go look at the voter guide. And came back and said, oh, well, I'm wrong. I didn't realize that. And so there are all sorts of things that people sometimes say. You may see something on a post, a blog post or Facebook page, or you hear somebody say something. This is one of the reasons why we make available the voter's guide as well as the other Pray, Organize, and Vote material, because you may have a misconception about a particular candidate, and those facts are really important. And sometimes when you have these debates, you get away confused because Marco Rubio said, I didn't say that, and Ted Cruz says, yes, I did. And Donald Trump says, you lied about that. And Ted Cruz said, no, I've got that. And so sometimes you can go to their websites, but there are other opportunities for you to check out exactly where some of the candidates stand on those issues. So let me encourage you certainly to take advantage of the Pray, Organize, and Vote material. Do want to hear from some of you in Nevada. The new poll that just came out yesterday has Hillary Clinton with a 1-point lead over Bernie Sanders, and that's within the range of confidence. So it's quite possible that you could end up with another tie, essentially, in Nevada, like we had in Iowa. Theoretically, she has a 20-point lead in South Carolina, but I just pointed out how some of these polls are all over the map. And Team Clinton maintains confidence that its lead in South Carolina will hold, but a potential loss in Nevada has put a lot of the people in the campaign on edge. One of the aides said it's hard to feel confident about South Carolina if you lose Nevada. So we're going to be watching that as well. As, again, I mentioned, on Saturday, of course, you have the South Carolina primary in the Republican Party, but you also have the Nevada caucus in the Democratic side, and this is a campaign that has not gone well for Hillary Clinton, and it has gone very well for Bernie Sanders. It's not so much that he's always resonated with individuals, but he's provided an alternative, and there are a lot of Democratic voters that are simply saying she's either a failed politician candidate, or there are just too many issues surrounding her, whether it's the connections to Wall Street, whether it's the email scandal, whatever it might be. So we'll see how that plays out in the next few days. And then, of course, on Monday, we'll talk about that. And then we'll be looking at the Nevada caucus, which is February 23rd for the Republicans, and then the South Carolina primary for the Democrats, which is February 27th. And since we're talking about Hillary Clinton, I think Wanda in Alabama would like to address the issue of Hillary Clinton and Ben Carson. So share with us what you'd like to say.
I think Ben Carson would make the great president because I believe he's a true man of God. He has a lot of heart. I think Hillary Clinton would make a great vice president because she has a lot of knowledge about the government where he don't. She would be a great aid to him.
I think they'd disagree on almost every issue. I can't even imagine, if indeed Ben Carson became president. Let's consider that. I really do wonder who he would pick, but I doubt he would pick Hillary Clinton of all the possibilities, simply because, he's pro-life, she's pro-abortion. He's for completely dismantling Obamacare. She says we just need to keep with Obamacare. I mean, you would have so many fights inside the Oval Office. You could probably pay... it'd be like watching a WWE fight or a cage match. I mean, I can't even imagine what that'd be like to put the two of those individuals in the same room. Although Ben Carson would probably be a lot more gracious than she is. I do want to admit that he is a real gentleman. I can't say that about her, but go ahead.
I think he is a wonderful man, and I think he should be higher up than what he is. I don't think people give him the credit that he deserves.
Well, and again, part of this is, if Ben Carson, when he lived in Maryland, had run for the Senate and won, I do believe that he would be almost unbeatable, because then you'd have a little bit of a record. He would have been in the Senate. Say he'd been in the Senate as long as Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz or something like that. Still wouldn't have been there long. Then you'd say, okay, he demonstrated that his incredible intellect, when you're with him, you're just amazed at how smart he is, but also how gracious and friendly and humble he is, but how he would then apply that to the political scene. I think there's just a lot of question marks, Wanda, because they just don't know. They say, he seems like a person that would make good decisions. He seems like he really would be somebody that everybody would admire. But we just aren't so sure, how that would play out in terms of his policies and how effective he would be as an executive. So I think that's why there's always just a little bit of a hesitation, because almost everybody that talks about Ben Carson likes him. They don't know that they think he should be the next president. So anyway, if this latest poll's out, he's up at 10%. That's a little better than he was looking at just a few days ago.
I just think all the ones that are on the top running right now just aren't what we need in office.
Well, again, the only adults in the room last Saturday in the debate seemed to be people like John Kasich and Ben Carson, more or less. I mean, I'll give credit to some of the others that were just trying to clarify the issue, but it got pretty hostile and difficult to even watch or listen to. But Wanda, I appreciate your suggestion. I think there is not a snowball's chance that Ben Carson and Hillary Clinton would be on the same team for all sorts of reasons, but nevertheless, it's kind of an interesting thought experiment, so appreciate that. Let's go out to Arizona. KNLB. Bob, I think you wanted to address the Pope and some of the comments he made. What are your thoughts?
Well, I do believe that the pontiff has stepped way over a line, even in his own beliefs within the Catholic Church on judgment. He has judged somebody a non-Christian for simple words that they say. I don't find anywhere on the Bible where that's pleasing to God. But secondarily, I find it more interesting that so many people that are using our tax dollars, their own private fortunes, and so many other methods to provide their own personal security aren't considered at all about my personal security.
Yes. There was a very good article that I posted a while back by Victor Davis Hanson in which he was pointing out that right now you have a situation in which individuals are implementing laws. And so he's talking not just about the political elite, he's also talking about the media elite and others as well, and the business elite who are in many cases implementing laws, policies, procedures, or whatever that don't really affect them. I mean, just think about this. President Obama can open the gates of the United States and not build a wall, or any member of Congress can say, we just need to have open borders, and they're not affected by it because they are protected in Washington, D.C. when they're there. Most of them go back to gated communities where they're protected as well. And they are not affected economically by the lowering of wages. They're not affected by the crime. And so in some respects, as you point out, we have individuals determining how we're going to live. Those of us that sometimes live from paycheck to paycheck, to be perfectly blunt. And they don't have to live paycheck to paycheck, and they're not affected by all those policies and procedures and things that are affecting all of us, but doesn't really affect them at all.
I do have a selfish request, though, of you.
Please do.
We have beautiful studios out here in Lake Havasu City at KNLB that are wonderful for doing remotes.
Oh, well, and I'm going to come out there. I'm ready. I fly over there to California so often because I've been to our good friends in Stockton and places like that, and Modesto and all that area. But I really do need to come and visit you. And if I do so, you come out and shake my hand?
I volunteer down at the station, and I will probably pick you up from the airport.
Well, then I'm ready. Okay.
Okay.
I love doing these remotes, day. And of course, I've been in places like Peoria, Illinois, and Augusta, Georgia, and Savannah, Georgia, and of course, our good friends out there in California. And I really need to make it around to many of the other radio stations. I'm doing some share-a-thon spots for some of them right now, but I'll take that invitation, see if we can make that happen. So let's take another phone call or two. Again, we'll go back to South Carolina. And in this case, Nick, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Yes, sir. I appreciate taking my call. I believe that Ted Cruz is highly underrated, that man is qualified not only spiritually, but educationally as well. I know how they feel about Ben Carson, but Ted Cruz has argued before the Supreme Court, I think, 8 different cases and won 6 of them.
Right, that's true. The Heller case, probably the best known. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's it. I mean, he's a humble individual and quiet. His wife is the daughter of missionaries, and Ted Cruz memorized the Constitution when I think he was something like 9 years old.
Yes, Rafael Cruz was in studio the other day sharing that. I got to take a break. Can I put you on hold? Because I don't want to interrupt you, but I just have one of those mandatory breaks that waits for no one. And we'll talk a little bit more about Ted Cruz. I've gotten to know his father fairly well. Never had a chance to meet Ted Cruz face-to-face, although I've been in audiences when he's spoken. So let's talk about him. And then we'll take some more of those phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. Be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. As I look at my screen here, there are people who want to talk about Ted Cruz and Donald Trump, as well as the Pope, and we'll try to get to those calls. If we don't, second hour, I do have Dr. Michael Youssef with us. He has a new book, End Times and the Secret of the Mahdi, and I really want to maybe change topics so that we can give him his due. This, by the way, if you are not familiar, he did his doctoral work on the individual that was, if you will, sort of the spiritual mentor of Osama bin Laden, and so when he comes to this microphone, either in studio or by phone, it's kind of like Joel Rosenberg. I just sit back and listen because they bring so much new material to us, so I certainly want to learn from him. But while we're talking about the campaign, Nick, I think you had a couple other comments, but again, Ted Cruz went to Princeton, went to Harvard, actually clerked under one of the more outstanding justices in the Supreme Court, William Rehnquist, was a Solicitor General, argued 8 cases before the Supreme Court, some very famous cases. And of course, as you know, United United States senator. So he brings a lot of expertise. A lot of people say, well, you've only been a senator for one term. True, but he had a lot of other things that he had done long before he was a U.S. senator, and certainly a very credentialed individual and an individual that understands the Constitution. Anything you'd want to add to that?
Yes, sir. He is also a great debater, and that's what we need. He is not easily intimidated. And if it was a one-on-one contest with any of those other people up there where they debated the real facts, he would make them look like morons, just like he's done to Trump.
Well, and he's done this ever since he was in college, because he won the debate championship there in Princeton. By the way, that's something else he had in common with Antonin Scalia. Scalia was a master debater at Georgetown and was valedictorian, and of course Ted Cruz went to Princeton years later. But just another aspect of what Ted Cruz brings to the conversation. And go ahead.
You know that he also has debated one of the cases in front of the United Nations, one of the Mexican cases.
I do remember that, yes.
I don't have the details, but I mean, he has a scenario like none of the others up there have, and he's just an outstanding man. And what needs to get out is the real things that he has done and what he stood for. Look how he stood up against the Republicans over things that were wrong, and you know that he can stand up against the Democrats.
Well, that's for sure. Yeah. Well, that's again his credentials. One more comment, and then I want to move on to some other people. What else would you say about him?
Well, just that Donald Trump, for some of the preachers like that have backed him, I question their Christianity. I really do, because Donald Trump is a wolf in sheep's clothing. He is no more a Christian than nobody out there. He is just like the things that he has said and done, the three marriages, the immorality, and the vulgarness. He is contemptible. And I can't see why Christians can't see that.
Well, again, one of the people I wanted to ask is, of course, the guest that was supposed to be with us the first hour and decided not to join us because of some other commitments. So we'll see if we can get Robert Jeffress, because he and Phyllis Schlafly and, of course, Jerry Falwell Jr. and others, and we'll get them on if we can and give you a chance to ask them questions. That's fair, I would think, and certainly they should be able to explain why they believe what they believe. Since we're talking about Donald Trump, let me go to North Carolina for just a minute before I go back to South Carolina and some other calls. And Jose, I think you've been a listener for some time, and I know you wanted to say something about Donald Trump as well. Well, I guess we lost him, so we'll go to Mike in South Carolina. Mike, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kerby. I appreciate all you do. My comment's about the Pope.
Sure.
Yeah. And the Pope is, making a comment about, building the wall and everything. My problem with him is this Pope is not, I don't believe he's a man of God, to support, gay marriage the way he's come out and done that. But for him to criticize someone else when, he really doesn't seem to be a man of God himself.
Well, and again, one of the things we would have talked about with Robert Jeffress is the Pope's made it sort of seem like there are lots of different ways to God. And, I don't know about that. Of course, even next week, we're going to have Greg Laurie in here. And he has a great line. He says, all paths lead to God, but not all paths lead to heaven. So it's probably a better way to say that. And so certainly we all will stand before God, and he'll be asking us how we're to be judged. And, of course, the Pope is raising some very important questions. And he has the right to do so, but we also have the right to say, I don't think his statements about the wall, or his statements about whether or not Donald Trump is a Christian, or whether or not that's part of the gospel, are appropriate as well. So certainly he has the right to say it, and we have the right to critique it as well. Just before we run out of time, let me come back to this issue of the iPhone, because this is going to be an issue I think is going to be around for some time. Tim Cook, who is, of course, the chairman of Apple, has said, we have great respect for the professionals at FBI, and we believe their intentions are good. He said, up to this point, we've done everything that is both within our power and within the law to help them. But he says, now the United States government has asked for us something we cannot do and something we consider too dangerous to create, and that is to build a backdoor to the iPhone. And they're talking about cracking the iPhone 5 that was owned by Syed Farouk, who with his wife Tashfeen Malik were the ones that attacked those individuals and killed them in San Bernardino. And the concern here is that they actually have ordered Apple to develop kind of a custom-built malware that would actually undermine its own security features. And so this is, first of all, a question as to whether or not Apple could do so. But the bigger issue is that these individuals that have the phone, that is the terrorists, have what is called an auto-wipe function. That is, if you don't put in the right code after 10 times, it erases everything. So the FBI wants to try to figure out how to break into it without it being wiped clean. And if the combinations are numbers, well, that won't take so long. But if it's letters and numbers, and if it's a 6-digit rather than a 4-digit, we're talking about something that could take maybe up to 5.5 years. So then there's another attempt, and that is they want Apple also to give them the key so that they not only have the key to that one, but the key to every iPhone, ultimately, if you think about this, so that they then can hook it up to a supercomputer, which would be thousands of times faster, so that eventually they could find out what's on that phone. There are a lot of people say, well, why doesn't Apple go along with this? And I think they see down the road that once you give this particular key to the FBI, it's only a matter of probably days. It might only be a matter of hours before all sorts of other people in law enforcement have that key. And even criminals eventually have that key. And anybody could crack into your secure data. So they understand what's at stake. And this is a privacy issue that we've talked about before here on Point of View. And so I think we're going to be discussing this issue about the iPhone probably as long as we may be discussing this issue of the fight to replace the Supreme Court vacancy. I don't think these are issues that are going to go away anytime soon, and so we may even do special programs on that to explain a little bit more of why that is such an important issue. But that's all we have for the first hour. Again, the original plan was for Robert Jeffress to join us, and certainly we would talk about his book, but I'm sure he'd have to answer some questions about his support, not endorsement, but at least support for Donald Trump. I'd love to hear what he has to say, and we'll give you that opportunity sometime in the future to hear what he has to say about that and to ask him questions if you'd like. But in the meantime, we're going to come back in the second hour today with our good friend, Dr. Michael Youssef. He's been in studio with me some. He'll be by phone today. His new book, End Times and the Secret of the Mahdi. This is important to really understand, as we talked about with Joel Rosenberg, apocalyptic Islam and the dangers we face from radical Muslims. So I'm looking forward to this interview. I know you are as well. And we'll open up the phones for you to ask him questions and make comments. In the meantime, visit our website, pointofview.net. We'll be back right after this.
When you're listening to or watching network news, do you ever start talking to the newsreader or anchor person? Come on, you can admit it, you do, don't you? You can't believe what you're hearing, and you feel the need to correct them. Sometimes you almost feel like you're living in a different world, and you are. People who deny God are living in a world of make-believe. The next time you're shaking your head at the news, I want you to do something. Pick up the phone, or write a check, or visit us online and give. Point of View brings you a biblically informed analysis of what's happening, but to do it, we need your partnership. Visit pointofview.net and click the link next to Donate Now where it says Become a Monthly Partner. Pointofview.net. Or mail your donation for this month to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. That's Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Don't just shake your head. Make a difference. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
You know, we're living in a time unlike any other. We suffer through war and terrorism, the threat of nuclear weapons, not to mention the rise of radical Islam. And so it is certainly a topic we like to come back to from time to time. And one of the individuals that has certainly formed my understanding of radical Islam is Dr. Michael Youssef. I remember many years ago when he was in studio with me, he shared with me that he had actually done a doctoral degree in social anthropology, focusing on some of these radical Islamic groups. And one of those was this Egyptian radical Muslim who actually in some respects was the spiritual mentor of Osama bin Laden. So when he brings some of his expertise in terms of his own background, having grown up in the Middle East, as well as his own training and his own understanding of these issues, I certainly want to sit back and listen, and I know you will want to as well. But we'll open up the phones a little bit later if you have some comments or questions. If you're not familiar with Dr. Michael Youssef, he is the founder and president of Leading the Way and has been involved in a worldwide ministry for so many years. His daily radio program and television programs are broadcast in 24 languages, seen worldwide. He's also, of course, the founding pastor of the Church of the Apostles in Atlanta, and as I mentioned, holds a number of degrees from Moore College in Sydney, Australia, as well as from Fuller Theological Seminary. And I mentioned, of course, he received his PhD in social anthropology from Emory University, author of 24 books, but the one we're going to talk about today, End Times and the Secrets of the Mahdi, Unlocking the Mystery of Revelation and the Antichrist. Dr. Youssef, always a delight to have you on the program with us.
Thank you so much, Kerby. It was so good to be with you again. I always remember that with fondness, our visit. You have a phenomenal memory. Thank you for remembering our visit. Yes.
Well, and again, you have done this research. There are a few people, when we bring them to the microphone, I say, you know, you just want to sit back and listen, because you really saw, probably in ways that other people did not, the spiritual origins of this radical Islamic movement. And so whether we're talking about the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, whether we're talking about Al-Qaeda, whether we're talking about Hamas, Hezbollah, now ISIS, you really have seen that and lived through a great deal of that. So again, I want to give you high praise for the fact that you bring so much to the table, and we really benefit from that.
Thank you so much. Well, it's I shared with you before, back in the early 80s, when I was doing my dissertation at Emory University, I decided to take my training in social anthropology and go and interview some of the folks who are involved in what back then was called jihad. One of them, of course, as you already mentioned, became the spiritual guide and mentor, really the intellect, the brain for Osama bin Laden. He's a medical doctor from Egypt. And I kind of got to their head. I kind of got to understand what they really want and why they want it and so forth. But I'm primarily a gospel preacher, and my heart of hearts always how to reach them with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we have a television station, 24/7, dedicated, Malakut, or Kingdom in English, dedicated to preaching the gospel into 160 million homes in the Arab world, and it's has great acclaim from many people. It says it's the most apologetics, intellectual, and Bible teaching channel. And the reason for that, I'm setting all of this up at the beginning, because I don't want anybody to misunderstand me and think that because I have these facts introduced into a possibility of the coming days in history, doesn't mean that I have any hatred in my heart whatsoever. In fact, I have deep love for the Muslim people, and the facts are the facts, the truth is the truth. But the people themselves I love, and I dearly long to see them come to Christ, and thank God that we are seeing thousands upon thousands. In fact, I'm on my way to the Middle East in a few weeks' time, and coming to Christ from every corner of the Arab world and Europe. Now, having said all of that, we got to understand, and that's what the book, I'm assuming, why he invited me, The End Times and the Secrets of the Mahdi, is that I began to teach the book of Revelation with fresh eyes.
Yes.
I went into the Islamic eschatology. What do they really... And I began to kind of compare it with the character known as the Antichrist and the other character called the false prophet and so forth. And I realized there's so many similarities that I haven't even focused on before in all my 67 years of life. And so I bring an insight into the book of Revelation from a modern-day possibilities of those, two characters, the Muslim Mahdi and the Antichrist in the Bible. And those similarities are incredible when you think about it. They both, the Mahdi and the Antichrist, will possess supreme political and religious authority. They both, the Mahdi and the Antichrist, will be worshipped as the head of a world religion, one world religion. And like the Antichrist, the Mahdi will establish his capital in Jerusalem.
Yes.
And he will rule the world from that holy city. In fact, the Bible said that the Antichrist will target Jews and Christians for destruction. Islamic eschatology also said that the Mahdi will wage war against Jews and Christians. And those who oppose the Antichrist will be executed, just like those who would oppose the Mahdi will be executed. And so this just the kind of, I'm scratching the surface here, is what really had led me to put this book together, understanding the book of Revelation from the context of today and the possibilities of today.
And isn't it fair to say that oftentimes when people have written about end times prophecy or revelation, we've sometimes looked at it through Western eyes, and so we've assumed that the Antichrist would be the head of a 10-nation confederacy, because it certainly talks about that, and that would be Western. And the question I always had in the back of my mind, Dr. Youssef, is, what do you do with 1.6 billion Muslims? I mean, this is the second largest religion in the world. It's hard for me to understand how Muslims would go along with the Antichrist unless the Muslim world had been so defeated or they were so demoralized they were willing to go with a kind of secular humanist Antichrist. Sure. And I think you've got a better answer for that, don't you think?
Yeah, he's got to be one of them.
Yeah.
And don't forget, Kerby, the only group in the world that is absolutely have an inherent motivation to dominate the world are the Islamists. I mean, think about that. I don't know, not even China has that inherent motivation. They may have some motives, but they are commanded by Allah to literally dominate and rule the world. I was watching a television program just 3 weeks ago on Middle East in Arabic, and this Islamist scholar, was describing how he believes that we are so close to the coming of their Christ. Now let me unpack this.
Let me jump in, because we have one of those mandatory breaks, because I want people to understand that really our Christ and their Christ are really like photo negatives, or the inverse, and we'll talk about that, but we have one of those mandatory breaks. And if you are already fascinated, I'm sure you are, this book is published by Worthy Publishing, and we have links to that. And first of all, we have links to Dr. Youssef. You can go to michaelyoussef.com. You don't need to know how to spell it, because we have a link there, and you can get the book there, as well as his previous books like Jesus, Jihad, and Peace, but all sorts of resources we have on the website today. But let's take a break. We'll come back and talk about the Mahdi, the Antichrist, and the Islamic Jesus. What does that look like? We'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, when Bernie Sanders won the New Hampshire primary last week, one of the commentators talked about how the senator believes there's a conspiracy underfoot. He argues that the reason we have so much income inequality is due to the fact that the billionaire class has rigged the economy. He makes it sound like this is a uniquely American problem. It is not. You can find similar gains by the 1% in places like Canada, the UK, and other European countries. And we might mention that most of the increase in income inequality over the last quarter century took place when fellow Democrats Bill Clinton and Barack Obama were president. His conspiracy is rather paranoid, don't you think? There are only a few hundred billionaires, yet we are to believe that this small, secretive cabal rigged the system so that they can get ahead, but you cannot. These billionaires made their wealth by designing software you use on your computer, by buying land and developing it, by building stores that sell goods at the lowest possible price, and by developing new and more efficient ways to extract oil and gas from the ground. Bernie Sanders ignores most of these billionaires, but talks about people and banks on Wall Street that speculate. As I mentioned in a previous commentary, that is why the movie The Big Short helps his campaign. It tells the story of some investors who bet against the housing market because they concluded it would fail. So far, the opponents of Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, or some future Republican nominee, have not critiqued his billionaire class conspiracy. The response has generally gone like this. It's fine, Uncle Bernie. Go back to your bed in the basement, and we'll call you when the dinner is ready. It's time for some candidates and some pundits to address his billionaire class conspiracy with some facts and common sense. The voters need to know the flaws in this conspiracy. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Columbia Pictures, LD Entertainment, and Affirm Films present Risen, the resurrection through the eyes of a non-believer. Risen, rated PG-13 in theaters February 19th.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Dr. Michael Youssef, End Times and the Secret of the Mahdi, Unlocking the Mystery of Revelation and the Antichrist. And Dr. Youssef, it would be helpful, I think, for our listeners for you to go through some of that, because just as Christians have an eschatology, an understanding of end times, Muslims do as well, but the returning Christ in Islam is not the Christ that we read about in the book of Revelation, is it?
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I began to tell you something that happened only 3 weeks ago. I watched it on my iPad from a television in the Middle East, where one of the great scholars was saying that he thinks that we're also living at the end times, and he was trying to explain what they believe that end time is, because most Muslims believe that Jesus was never crucified. That what happened when the soldiers came into the Garden of Gethsemane and they said, "Are you Jesus?" And he said, "Yes." They all fell back. And because Jesus was perfect, they believed that, and he was virgin born, God could not allow him possibly to suffer like this and go to a cross, because men do not need redemption in Islam. And so the cross to them really doesn't make sense. And so when that happened, God pulled Jesus up to heaven, and he put the likeness of Jesus in Judas Iscariot, and so they crucified Judas Iscariot and not Jesus. Meanwhile, Jesus in heaven at the age of 33, the age that he was pulled up to heaven. And so when he arrives back, which they believe very soon, he's going to arrive at the age of 33, and that he's going to live for 7 years, and he's going to help the Mahdi to dominate the world and rule the world. He will go to Mecca, and he'll declare himself a Muslim, and then he will turn against the Jews and the Christians and help the Mahdi in destroying the Jews and the Christians and turn the world into one world religion under the Mahdi. And I was watching this, and I'm almost pinching myself. I said, this is absolutely remarkable. But I also need to explain something that your listeners, especially those who are Muslims who are listening to this, they say, well, wait a minute, there's a division between Shiite and Sunni in terms of eschatology, and that's exactly right. The Shiite, who believe in a different line of succession to Muhammad, believed that the 12th successor, back in the 9th century, disappeared at infancy. He was number 12. Sometimes you hear the 12th Imam. That's the man, the successor, who disappeared in infancy.
Yes.
They believe that he is coming back. He's hiding somewhere, that he's going to come back as the Mahdi when the world is in a state of turmoil, and he's going to bring peace and dominates the world. Just to kind of a slight difference between the Sunni and the Shiite that I think your listeners, I know, will be interested in knowing.
So again, what we are talking about is almost the reverse. In other words, the return of this Jesus is to destroy all crosses, all pigs, establish the rule of Islam, help the Mahdi. Yes. And how in the world, I guess, does that fit with maybe Revelation 13? Because here you meet the beast, which is right. Also referred to in other places in the New Testament as the Antichrist. Right. And you're suggesting that maybe it's at least possible that what the book of Revelation talks about as the Antichrist parallels up with what Islam talks about in terms of the Mahdi.
Exactly. And the false prophet, of course, is the second character that he's going to supposedly help the Mahdi, and their Christ, which is they don't see him as Jesus, or see him as they call him Masih ad-Dajjal, or the false Messiah, whom the Mahdi and the real Christ are going to defeat. But either Sunni or Shiites in their kind of views of Islam. Now remember, Muhammad borrowed a great deal from the Old and New Testament. He also was, in the early days of his life, when he was really searching, he was discipled by an Nestorian monk who was a cousin of his wife, and he was being discipled into this Christian heresy. But then this man died, and he was left bereft of guidance and went through a traumatic time of confusion, which is actually acknowledged in their history. But then he came at the end, waged war against his polytheistic tribe, and once he won and became victorious, he declared himself to be not enforcing the faith of Judeo-Christian, that's Moses and Jesus, but that he is the third, the best, and the final revelation of Allah. And so, to them, while they do not understand that so much was borrowed from the Old and the New Testament, it looks like original to them, but it's really not original. It's the same devil, and he reads the Bible. He knows what's in it, and I'm not surprised.
In your book, there's a place where you actually kind of connect that, because you say that if you think about it, we have three monotheistic religions: Judaism, yes, Christianity, and Islam. Right. And you point out, and this probably is a surprise to maybe even some of our listeners, that all three of these great religions, the religions of the book, all have an eschatology. They all have an end times prophecy.
That's right.
So we shouldn't really be surprised that there may be some very significant parallels between Islam and Christianity, because Islam, Christianity, and Judaism all have some kind of end time scenarios, don't they?
Exactly, and I'm sure you visited Jerusalem many times, and there on the wall, in the wall of Jerusalem, there is the Golden Gate. And I looked at that Golden Gate from different directions. I watched it very closely. It is blocked, and there's a wall inside the gate. And they said they do not want to open it up because they believe, my Jewish friends believe, that when their Messiah comes back, he's going to open that Golden Gate and march into Jerusalem. And so there is a lot of that commonality, but it comes, of course, from there's a Bible, there's a Scripture, there is a God, and there's a Satan, and And once you understand that from a Christian point of view, understand biblically, it grieves me that biblical literacy has gone so down in our country. I mean, literally, I could weep over it. But when you do understand what the scriptures say, then you look at all the other stuff, particularly the Islamic eschatology, you would be, like Jesus said, lift up your head. Don't be fearful. Eschatology for us doesn't mean that we put on white robes and head for the mountains, but rather share Christ with people, bring people to Christ, and be working, occupy till I come, Jesus said, and lifting up our heads because we know the day of our redemption is drawing nigh.
Certainly. And again, I want to encourage people to visit your website because they will have access to some of those great resources. And again, it's michaelyoussef.com. If you don't know how to spell it, we've got a link there. But certainly you have information about this newest book, which is End Times and the Secret of the Mahdi, but also some of your other books that we've talked about as well, Jesus, Jihad, and Peace, What Bible Prophecy Says About World Events Today. And these would be just great resources for you. And Dr. Youssef, just before we take a break, talk about what is available either through your website or the church, because I want people to get some good material and to really begin to think biblically about what's happening in our culture right now.
Sure. Particularly for this book, they can go to LTW, or Leading the Way. That's what LTW.org would be easier, or .com. And then they can order the book from there, or they can go to Amazon or bookstores. We'll be on the bookstores next week. And then they can also go to endtimessecrets.com, and they can read about the book. In fact, they can download a chapter or two as samples to give them an idea of what the book is about.
Yes, again, endtimesecret.com. We have that link too. So endtimesecret.com. Of course, we have michaelyoussef.com. And of course, you can also have Leading the Way. Let's take a break, but when we come back, I'd love to talk a little bit more about the reign and fall of the Antichrist, because, okay, we've talked about the Antichrist. We've talked a little bit about the false prophet. You also have the witnesses there and some other issues that are part of the book of Revelation, how maybe that fits in with not only end times prophecy, but some of the ideas that Muslims have. And we've already started getting phone calls, so if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to make a statement or ask a question or engage the conversation today with Dr. Michael Youssef, feel free to do so. 1-800-351-1212. If you're just joining us, though, this book is published by Worthy, and as he pointed out, you probably can find it in your local bookstore, but if not, we have all the links necessary for you to order it. End Times and the Secret of the Mahdi, Unlocking the Mystery of Revelation and the Antichrist. Fascinating book, and really causing, I think, a lot of us to rethink maybe some of the things we thought we knew about the book of Revelation. So if you would like to join the conversation, engage in the conversation and discussion, you are welcome to do so. It's all available at our website, pointofview.net. As you go there, don't forget we also have our Pray, Organize, and Vote material and other resources that you would probably like to have access to. It's all available at the website, pointofview.net. We'll be back right after this.
Later this year, for the 58th time, America will choose a president. As a Christian, what are you doing to prepare for the election? Helping you cut through the major media spin is part of the mission of Point of View. We want to provide the best election resources, including a new website, Pray, Organize, Vote, encouraging people to intercede for the upcoming election, to help you get registered so you can exercise the stewardship of voting, to share things to help you get people involved and out to the polls. But to do all of that, we need you to vote right now with your support for Point of View. Show us that you're in this for the long haul as a citizen of heaven as well as the United States. Click Donate Now at the top of the page and give the most generous one-time gift you can at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. There is a lot of work to be done. Let's get to it together. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Privileged to have with us today Michael Youssef as we talk about his new book, End Times and the Secret of the Mahdi. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's take a few phone calls and we'll talk about the reign of the Antichrist and the Mahdi. But let's go to North Carolina first. Bill, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
Yes, I'm interested in whether there is a prophesied event such as Armageddon in the Quran. It's a parallel to the biblical Armageddon.
Dr. Youssef?
Sure, good question. There is in both Sunni and Shia, there is a time in which going to be an upheaval, and that's why this concept of the Jesus who was not crucified going to come back, and in 7 years' time he's going to bring peace. But right after that, going to be a day of judgment. At the age of 40, he'll be 40 years old at that point, and then he is going to be assisting the Mahdi in that day of judgment in the final day. So yes, there are some, not quite the armies, lining up, marching into Magiddo in Israel and so forth. But there is a big global catastrophic events will be taking place.
Yeah, certainly some parallels there as well. Let's go out to California, KYCC. Chris, I think you have some questions for Dr. Michael Youssef.
Yeah, how you guys doing today?
Very good. What would you like to add to the conversation?
Well, you were talking about, the world being divided up into, 10 sections earlier.
Yeah, that was at least, the idea of a 10-nation confederacy or something like that. That's one of the reasons why some people have thought, well, that's the Roman Empire, and so the Antichrist would be like Western. But Dr. Youssef makes a pretty compelling case that what do you do with 1.6 billion Muslims? Well, if he's one of them...
I wanted to add to that statement is that I know the North American Union has already been, they've been trying to form it. And there's actually currency that's already been printed. If you Google North American Union, currency and hit images, they already have bills printed. And actually, not to get political, but I've heard a lot that Ted Cruz and his wife actually accompanied former President Bush on, getting that agenda going, and meeting actually with the President of Mexico. And it kind of makes, and he's supposed to be the big Christian guy, that's running right now. And it kind of makes me think that, in this time we're living in, the elections just seem to be a distraction. Like, I don't know. I wanted to get an opinion on, if you think one guy that we get in office is going to make anything better, because it seems like, as far as what I've researched, nobody can really fix anything, and most of them are on the other side.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, Dr. Youssef, let's get into that, because the globalism and the one world government and all that,
Sure.
How does that fit?
Sure. Well, let me put your mind at rest with Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is a Christian believer who knows the Lord and loves the Lord like any Christian that I have known. So let's put that aside, and let me tell you that in many ways, some of those people around, some leaders who are they are preparing, they are making it easier for the Antichrist when he appears. Let me give you an example. It's on YouTube. It's not a secret. The Pope Francis have met together with the head of Hinduism and Buddhism and Sikh and others, and they all have the talk. The words that we love each other and we all one and so forth. And this is something that Pope Benedict has rejected and really fought for a long time, with John Paul II wanted, and now, of course, Francis is doing it, where they're getting all the religions together. And then for the first time in the Vatican, we've seen the Pope kisses the Quran and then invited a Muslim imam to call for prayer. And so the coming together into one world religion, or one world order, if you like, is something that whoever is working toward it is making it easier, that when the time comes, and whenever that is, none of us really know, that to give rise to the Antichrist make it easier for him. That's at least my point of view.
Yes, and again, who would have predicted this even a few decades ago, that you could even have something that looked like a one-world religion, because the religious faction seems so divided, and even the idea of a one-world economic system, or even the idea that European nations wouldn't be fighting against each other, and that you would have a European common market first, and now, of course, the European Union. Those are all things that seem to me to say that we're getting a lot closer to some of these end times events than we've ever been before.
Of course, and that is the whole religion of tolerance. Is you find their intolerance really come to the surface if you speak about the exclusivity of Christ. And that is within mainline denominations, some evangelicals, that is tolerance, and tolerance seems to be invading the world, whether it would be the Russian Orthodox and the Catholics, or the groups getting together and the other religions and so forth. All of that is contributing toward that tolerance of all religions, and so that when one person comes in and he says, yes, all of this is fine, but you have to be unified in worshiping me, it will become a lot easier for him, as it were.
Let's just, before taking another phone call, talk about this idea of the reign of the Antichrist, or the Mahdi, because you said, okay, well, we have the Antichrist, that could be the Mahdi, and then, of course, we've talked about the false prophet, but also in the book of Revelation, in the scenario that you put forward?
Well, the witnesses are the ones who, I mean, of course, there's some in the interpretation. To me, I just take it, the principle is that think of those 21 Coptic Christians who are beheaded their blood flowed into the Mediterranean. And this was a deliberate act on the part of ISIS, because they said, we want that blood to float into Rome, and to remind them that we are coming. In order, we're going to dominate the world. And just think of one of those. In fact, the Wall Street Journal just 2 days ago was having had the story in it. So this is not speculation. That one of the 21, the 20 were known, all Coptic. We know where town they come from in Egypt and so forth. And they given the chance to deny Christ, they said no. The African, which is the 21st guy. We did not know where he stands or where is he from or anything, but when they came to him and he saw all the others being beheaded, he said to them, he said, their God is my God. And he was martyred too. So I mean, these martyrs, these are the people who under the altar, as it were, crying out to God, how long will you avenge our blood? But according to Islamic eschatology, Jesus, or Isa, they call him, is going to assist the Mahdi. Just as the Bible said that the false prophet will assist the Antichrist and establish a global empire. This is not coincidence in my judgment. Once again, Satan knows the Scripture better than we do, and Satan knows that every verse of the Bible is preparing the Islamist world to recognize the Antichrist as the Mahdi and the false prophet as Isa. But let me just take a couple of minutes, Kerby, if I can, because, again, this is an issue that many professing Christians don't understand. That from the very beginning, when Satan rebelled against God in heaven and wanted to dethrone him and take his place and wanted to be worshipped and was thrown out of heaven with a third of the angelic being, ever since that time, he has been working toward being worshipped himself. From the moment he misled Adam and Eve to this day, Satan has only one purpose in mind. All of his satanic forces, demonic forces, working around the clock toward only one thing, that he may be worshipped, so that the mirror image of him, the Antichrist, is the mouthpiece of Satan, is the one who's going to be the one that he's going to experience that worship through him. And that is why we must understand. There's so many evangelicals running around today, well, we don't know Satan is really doesn't exist, and of course he loves that. And these are not liberal churches. I'm talking about evangelicals are denying the existence of Satan.
Very true.
And the very fact that his evil power is operating in the world, that's why he's called the God of this world, and that he is the one behind all of these kind of events until, of course, finally our Lord Jesus Christ appear from heaven, and he's going to smite him, destroy him, and destroy his kingdom.
Yes.
He has been trying ever since to be worshipped, and so he uses all these characters and all this on the stage of life to basically accomplish his goal.
We'll take a break and continue our conversation with Dr. Michael Youssef after the break. Book is entitled End Times and the Secret of the Mahdi. It is published by Worthy, and we'll come back and take some more phone calls right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. Michael Youssef with us for just a few more minutes as we talk about his book, End Times and the Secret of the Mahdi. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Georgia this time. Neil, you're on with Dr. Youssef.
Yes, Kerby, I really appreciate your show, and Dr. Youssef, I just finished listening to Leading the Way this morning, and I appreciate you very much. And my question is from Mark 13, Matthew 24, where Jesus is saying, I tell you that this generation shall not pass away until these things come about. Many in the Reform camp believe that that's referring to Jerusalem in the 70 A.D., the destruction of Jerusalem. I just wondered what your take is on that. And then also, I wanted to say, encourage everyone with a quote by Tertullian: "The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. Christ is building His church."
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Neil. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, you're right. That was that is a one interpretation that this generation will not pass, namely 70 A.D., when the Romans came and razed Jerusalem to the ground, and there was a lot of bloodshed has taken place. Now, there's another way to look at it, that is that the generation that will see these signs, the signs of the birth, Jesus talked about the birth pangs, and in birth pangs, having 4 children, 8 grandchildren, I can tell you, when labor pains start, they come in maybe an hour intervals, then shorter and shorter and shorter intervals. And he's saying that when you see these things are happening in shorter intervals, shorter periods of time, then you know that the end is around the corner. The baby is about to be born. And there's another, as I said, there's another way of looking at this, and I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong, but another way of looking at it is that the generation that will begin to see the signs of the end of times will not pass away before they see the return of Christ. And so either way, it's really, it doesn't matter, because I believe every generation must be looking forward to the return of Christ. The Apostle Paul kept looking forward to what called in the Greek the parousia, the return of Christ. And when toward the end of his life, when he did not experience that, he realized he's going to heaven. He said to Timothy, "Now you, Timothy, wait for the parousia. You're probably going to see it." And then from that time on, every generation said, we must be looking forward to the return of Christ. Every generation must, regardless of the signs. But what I mentioned in the book, that there are certain things that we would not have understood probably 100 years ago. Let me give you an example. In the book of Revelation, chapter 18, it talks about, and you really get the very strong feeling is that there is a global economic collapse. Well, 100 years ago, whatever happened in China and Japan and England, not necessarily impacts the entire globe, but now it does. As soon as the market goes down in Beijing or Shanghai, the rest of the world gets affected. And so we're seeing that. And we're seeing also the love of many are growing cold. Jesus asked the question, when the Son of Man will even find faith on the earth? And now so many churches turning their back on the core of the gospel, namely that Jesus and only Jesus saves, and there's no name under heaven by which men can be saved. Now they're saying, well, there are too many ways to God. George Barna and many others have said 60-70% of so-called born-again Christians are saying there are more ways to God than just Jesus. So the love of many is growing cold. Apostasy is rampant. And so you look at all these things that are happening within our generation, that makes us not put on white robes and head for the mountains, but rather be motivated to occupy till he comes, to share Christ with people, to evangelize, to reach as many lost people with the gospel of Jesus Christ as possible, and be active and be involved, and then lift up your head, because you know the day of redemption, your day of redemption is drawing near.
Dr. Youssef, just before we end today, you have whole sections, of course, about the new heavens and the new earth, but also heaven and hell. And just before we leave, I thought it might be good for you to just say that anybody listening here, we're not just talking about this so that we can kind of tickle your ears or tell you about what's going to happen. There are some real consequences. There are spiritual consequences if you have never placed your faith in Jesus Christ.
Absolutely. In fact, in that, I just hope that people who are going through questioning or seeking, that will get the book. If I can afford it, I'll give it to you, because I have the 7 letters of Revelation at the end to show, to kind of bring the whole thing into an invitation for a person reading it, and not just be disturbed about all these things that are happening, but then come to a point and say, hey, if you put your faith in Jesus Christ alone, if you confess your sin and receive him as your only Savior and Lord, not only you'll be forgiven and you're restored, and that you'll have peace with God and the peace of God, but you will be assured of heaven, that you'll be assured that you have escaped from the judgment that is coming upon the world. that you have received eternal life with Christ. Your eternal life begins the moment you say yes to Jesus. So I really hope anyone who's listening who may not, maybe just on the border, sitting on the fence, this is the moment, this is the day, this is the hour. You say, Lord Jesus Christ, come into my life. I place my faith in you, and you will never regret that. I've made that decision 50 years ago. Not one single moment in my darkest hour ever regretted giving my life to Jesus Christ.
Well, again, final chapters there, part 5, Apocalypse Now, how Revelation impacts our lives today. And again, I love how you say it. If Jesus wrote you a letter, because he writes to the 7 churches, and that applies to everyone. And just once again, a reminder that Revelation is to encourage us to know that the end is coming, but that we know how the end takes place because we've read the final chapter and we know who wins. But more importantly, that it should encourage you, if you're a believer, to go out and share your faith, and certainly encourage any of you listening today that have never accepted Jesus Christ to once again reevaluate that and to make that personal decision for Jesus Christ. A great opportunity. You can find out a little bit more about Dr. Youssef. We have given you a number of links. You can, of course, find out about the book at endtimesecret.com. And, of course, we have links to Leading the Way as well as to Michael Youssef. And Dr. Youssef, just always great to have you on the program, and thank you for giving us an hour today.
Thank you so much, Kerby. You're a good man, and I appreciate you, and I appreciate your ministry. You really are informing and equipping the believers as well as reaching the lost, and I thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much. We're going to take a break. And so, again, Dr. Michael Youssef, you can find out more by following the links on our website. You don't even have to know how to spell his name because we've done that for you. And I think you're really going to benefit from some of his material. So please visit our website, pointofview.net. Now, as you go there, you're also, of course, going to have a chance to listen to and watch and read my Viewpoint section, if you'd like. We have, of course, a video for you. And, of course, don't forget we have our Pray, Organize, and Vote material. All of that available to you on the website, pointofview.net. You've also heard us talking a little bit about this movie Risen. I had a chance to see the advanced screening on Monday and do commend it to you. We've had some of the commercials that we've played because we just wanted you to know that from time to time there are some great films that, number one, will encourage you as a Christian, and number two, give you maybe a context to begin to share your faith with a non-Christian. And certainly the whole way of looking at the resurrection through the eyes of a non-believer, very well done. And I might just encourage you to find out a little bit more about that and maybe bring some unsaved friends to the movie as well, because it will give you an evangelistic and apologetic basis for the resurrection. So all of those resources you can find on our website, pointofview.net. And as you go there, if you can support this ministry, we would greatly appreciate that as well. Again, the website, pointofview.net. And as you go there, please click on some of those buttons. If you'd like to listen to this again, we have a podcast that you can download, and certainly encourage you to get some of those resources. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow in our Friday Weekend Edition.
Pictures and LD Entertainment, in association with Affirm Films, the studio that brought you Heaven is for Real and War Room, comes Risen, the biblical story of the resurrection as told through the eyes of a non-believer.
The body has vanished. His tomb is empty.
Risen, starring Joseph Fiennes, rated PG-13, may be inappropriate for children under 13, in theaters February 19th. More information is available at risen-movie.com.
Are you concerned about what's happening in our colleges, our marketplace, and the halls of government? Let me ask, have you invested in things that yield a good harvest? If you're already giving to Point of View each month, we thank you. You share in the reward for what we harvest. If you're not, now is the time. $30, $65, $100. The more you invest on a regular basis, the more we'll reap together. Give online at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Click at the top on Become a Monthly Partner or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.